So I'm going to be going over how to enter the Safe Haven intake information into Case Manager. But first, I wanted to provide you with an example of the Safe Haven intake form. Okay, so now we're going to proceed to enter the rest of the Safe Haven intake information into Case Manager, beginning with the eligibility section. So right here, you'll notice on the form that we have 3 fields, which is the provisional mental health diagnosis, the provisional SUD diagnosis, and the last offense. For the first field, for provisional mental health diagnosis, they indicated NA and none reported. What this essentially means is that they provided an assessment to the client and there did not appear to be any mental health needs. For a provisional SUD diagnosis, they indicated F code 1220, which is cannabis dependence, and then they indicated mild to moderate. For last offense, they indicated grand theft auto, which under Prop 47 eligibility criteria, it is a qualifying offense. For that reason, you would leave these boxes unchecked. However, it is important to note that in Case Manager, there is a button to select qualifying offense. It's not currently on the form, but we will be making updates to it, so please stay tuned for that. However, in the meantime, if the client has a qualifying offense on the form, you would just leave it unchecked. So we're going to go ahead and copy this information over into Case Manager, beginning with the mental health diagnosis. So I'm going to type in NA and none reported. And I'm going to select none reported here. You'll notice that not screened is already selected here, here, and here. And that's because initially when the referral came in, the data team had already indicated that the client had not been screened for any of the eligibility criteria. So you will notice that the not screened button is already checked off. However, please proceed to enter the corresponding information. So here I'm going to select none reported. For SUD diagnosis, I'm going to indicate F code 1220, which is cannabis dependence. And I'm going to select mild to moderate. For last offense, I'm going to copy over grand theft auto. And in Case Manager, I'm going to select qualifying offense. Keep in mind that on the form, there is no option for qualifying offense. So if it's a qualifying offense, you would just leave these boxes unchecked. However, if it is a disqualifying offense, then you would proceed to check this box right here. Another thing to know is that for these examples, I just showed you how to enter the information on these forms. But again, the options that you select will be highly dependent on the diagnosis that was observed, and whether or not you were actually able to conduct the screening or even verify their last offense. So now moving forward to the enrollment status. For Prop 47 eligible, unknown was indicated. For enrolled in services, no was indicated. And for not enrolled, select reason, other pending triage was indicated. So again, the reason that we have not, selected yes or no for eligibility, or we haven't enrolled them into services, is because the client has just received their intake and they still need to go through the proper triage process in order to determine their final eligibility. So as you're doing your intake, if you are doing this, either through hard copy or you're doing it electronically, then you would just indicate unknown here, no in this box, and then you would indicate pending triage here. Once triage happens, then the appropriate person would go into the client profile and they would update this information accordingly based on what was decided at triage. So now I'm going to copy this information over into Case Manager. One thing that you'll notice is that for Prop 47 eligible and enrolled in services, the options are already selected. Again, that's because when we first enter a referral into the system, we already fill this information in there. So you'll notice that it's already filled out. In this situation, for reason not enrolled, the data team indicated unable to reach. That's because prior to the client coming in for services, we had been attempting to reach the client and we had not yet been able to do so. However, because we were able to actually screen the client this time, we would change it from unable to reach to other. And then for this box over here that says reason not enrolled other specify, we would indicate pending triage. Again, this information would then be updated at a later time. For participation status, you're gonna go ahead and leave it blank. You don't have to worry about that. That's something that the data team will fix at a later time. For tier assignment, you're going to select the appropriate tier. In this situation, if you provided any basic needs to them during the intake, then you're going to select tier 1. However, if the client did not receive any services at all, then you would select no services received. Once triage is done, it will either be determined that the client is a tier 1A, 1B, or 1C. Again, having a letter designated under the tier indicates the mental health or SUD severity. So tier 1A means that they fell in the mild to moderate range. Tier 1B means that they fell in the chronic to severe range. And tier 1C means that they did not appear to have any mental health or SUD needs. Tier 2 means that they had mild to moderate short term needs, and tier 3 means that they had mild to moderate long term needs. However, for the purposes of this intake, you will only be selecting either tier 1 or no services received, depending on what was provided to them during the intake session. The individual conducting the intake does have the option of selecting tier 1A, 1B, or 1C on the actual form, but that could easily change once triage is conducted. However, for the purposes of entering into case manager, again, you will either just select tier 1 or no services received. At a later time, the appropriate person will either change this to a tier 1A, 1B, or 1C, and they will use this field right here to indicate the tier change along with any other notes. Moving on to the next part of the form, you'll notice the interim care plan. You'll notice that there's two fields, one for service plan number 1 and the other for service plan number 2. I'm going to go ahead and copy this information over. So the first one is client will be connected with housing support. I'll proceed to enter this information into service goal number 1. And then client will be linked to legal aid. I will again copy this information and paste this into service goal number 2. Again, I say paste because we have the hard copy version, but if you're entering it directly into case manager, then you would just be directly entering it into these fields. Over here for the treatment team, you'll notice that it already says not assigned for each one. You'll go ahead and leave it that way because again, the client has yet to be triaged, and once the client is triaged, then we will be determining the appropriate staff to assign to the case. In this section right here, you'll notice that it says additional notes. If there's any additional notes, you would go ahead and enter it into this box right here. But in this case, there's not any notes, so we would go ahead and leave it blank. So now that we're finished, we're gonna go ahead and hit save. And you'll notice at the top that it says form saved. So now we've entered all of our intake information, and we had already changed the program status to pending triage. So this will alert staff that the client still has to be triaged, and the case can be pulled up during your daily triage. Again, the appropriate person would then go into the profile and modify it and select the appropriate outcomes.